And we're back.
Welcome to No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Perrin.
Tonight, we've got a very special guest. He's a member of the Pathfinder design team. And if the Pathfinder design team was a boy band, he would be the pragmatic one. We are joined by Mr. Stephen Radney-MacFarland.
I think everybody's happy that we're not a boy band. We would be the worst boy band ever.
Oh, so you would be, 98 degrees? I don't know. I didn't call an example fast enough. You'd be 98 degrees. How are you doing, Stephen?
I'm doing great. Happy to be on the show. Good to see you guys. Always a pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's nice. It's a pleasure to have you on, too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm going to have to take your word for that.
We are going in a different direction with this episode. It's like if the boy bands were a TV show, and this was a very special episode where we got to know your character's other interests. No, this is a very important metaphor that we're going to hear a lot.
Oh, my goodness.
Why are you going all in on boy bands?
Because I get that reaction from Stephen. Yes, so this is where we're finding out more about Stephen, about your talents and interests, and specifically about how you relate, how they relate to cartography and the new Pathfinder Flip Tiles line.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell people who might not know what the Flip Tiles line is and how it compares to other map products that have put out, and then how you fit into the whole equation.
Sure. Flip tiles are a replacement for the map packs that Paizo put out for a good number of years. And what flip tiles, what flip tiles do is, one, they're double-sided, and so that's fun enough. They also are 6x6 squares because once upon a time when they decided the size for flip tiles, or not flip tiles but map packs. It was 5x8, which I worked on that size for years and years and years, and it's very hard to create good, interesting content in that size. And so I wanted something, because we started playing, when I took over the line, which was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I wanted to do things with a lot more synergy and could work with other packs and everything else. And so I did that, but that size was just getting in my way. We also found out that some map packs were very popular and sold out very quickly. And once they were sold through, you couldn't get them anymore. Dungeons being a very good example. And so I made a pitch that said, why don't we make, first off, a starter set that is evergreen. It doesn't go out of print, and that's the basic thing. And then do expansions for those starter sets, and then have the starter sets themed. And so our first three themes, two of which are out, are Dungeon and Forest, and the Urban one is about to come out.
Mm-hmm. So there's one other theme after that?
Well, we'll probably do more themes.
Okay.
Absolutely, we'll do more themes. Like Caverns is probably a really good theme. Urban is more cities, so we might do a town theme. Sewers I'd like to do as urban expansions every once in a while, but we might do, the popularity might get us to do that. There's some talk about maybe ship themes or a ship starter set, which seems a little niche, but ships always sell really well. So so as we go through the line and see how well it sells and see what people want, we'll come up with new starter sets. Probably not in sort of the rapid way that we're doing this year, where we're doing 3 of the major ones. Later on, it might be one a year or one every other year based on what we need, because we want to do expansion as well, and the more starter sets we have, the more we have to sort of split that expansion theme. So, and right now our first 3 expansions are Dungeon Perils, Forest Perils, and Urban Perils, which just to make things simple. But as we go on after that, like I just finished Dungeon Vaults, which is going to be the second dungeon expansion, and then the forest expansion will have something different, because I can't have forest vaults, right? That would be kind of silly.
Unless.
And then on top of that, I also design the flip mats. And what I mean by design is I decide Eric Moan and I usually sit around and decide like what maps are going to come out in a year. And then I'll complain that I don't want to do another tavern, and he'll be all like, "But taverns sell." And I'm like, "How many damn taverns do I have to do?"
One per town.
Yeah, one per town. And I just got done with the tavern multi-pack, which I'm like, really, I've got to do 4 taverns? And but he was really happy with the 4 taverns I did. They're really fun. And then even with that, we send them to Jason Engel. Like, I have these colorful maps.
Oh, do you have samples?
Yeah. That's so. For example, here's an old like a flip. Oh, I should put it by the.
There we go.
From the old flip mats line, and so I come up with these things that are very bold and pretty colorful. So Jason knows exactly where I want things positioned, and then he makes them very pretty. And does a fantastic job of really coming. Really having it come to life. And so I'll do a whole bunch of sketches, and then I'll do a write-up, and because it'll be like, alrighty, I want this really fancy altar with all 4 elementals that kind of interact with one another, but I'm not going to draw that because it's just going to look like a mess. So where I put the highlighter, have it in there and make it look cool. And Jason's like, yep, okay, boop, 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 boop. And then it comes back and I'm like, oh yeah, that's even better than I had in my imagination. So yeah, basically the tone to makes it just pop and look. So yeah, that's the basics. And I do that for the Pathfinder line. Other people do it for the Starfinder line. As flip mats and now map packs, we're getting initial sales reports, and people are just gobbling them up. Sell really well. So there was a period where they kept on putting more and more and more on my schedule, and it would be like bigger dungeon and bigger this and multi-pack that. And the next thing I knew, I went from like doing 12 map products a year to up to the equivalent of up to 15. I'm just like, wow. And then even with the flip tiles, those are much more complex than the map packs, and so I'm like, but I got kind of hoisted by my own petard on that one because I was the one who really wanted the change in that product and talked people into it, hopefully to make it more easy to use and sees more play on the table.
Yeah, I mean, when you very first started to tease the flip tiles, I just went crazy for cheering because I've also wanted you all to make that changeover for a long time, and I doubt that there is a few of us that thought the same thing. And just to see that, oh, they're square, they're going to be able to be used much more easily. And then the bonus part where they actually flip, that was optional in my cheering of awesomeness. And I was kind of just blown away that you guys were finally going to do this. Not that I don't like the old map ones, but the size, like you said, made it awkward. And you said it was awkward to design for, and it did make it sometimes awkward to use. So tell me about when you decided to make that change over to the new format. Like, what was the catalyst there? And why did you make the switch?
Well, I think I probably started talking to other people in the company about 3 years ago on doing that. And just like any kind of new project, it takes a lot of time for people to sort of wrap their heads around it and go, okay, we can do it. Because before, I was just kind of like this machine, and I produced a thing, and then they sent it off. Or what was that?
We lost your video for a second, and you also kind of stalled, but
okay.
We also may have just lost something you were saying because it sounded like you suddenly stopped talking.
Oh, yeah, probably.
Do you mind just taking it back 5 seconds?
Sure. Basically, when you have a product and it has a motion of its own, and they just wait for my sketches, and they send it to Jason, and you send it to the printer, and step and repeat. A lot of times people don't want to sort of reevaluate that, just because I don't know if you've noticed, but Paizo puts out a lot of product, and everybody's busy. Yeah, just a tiny bit. And so it took a long time for me to be able to talk the right people into doing it, because all of a sudden they have to look at new product specs and get new quotes from the printer, figure out if it's feasible. And so that took a lot of time. Everybody liked the idea, but didn't know if it was feasible. And then once we got that through, folks became more excited about it. And so, yeah, it's mostly about logistics, because flip tiles did pretty well. Well enough to keep on doing, and I kept on saying, well, I think we're going to sell more of these, and they're like, well, things are selling pretty well, and I'm like, no, we can do a better job, and convincing people and then getting the logistics done probably took the most amount of time.
I think with the map packs, one of the selling points was modularity, and so every now and then you would get a map pack that just felt like they took a bigger map and chopped it up. Is that a reflection of the limitation of the space that you had to design in?
Well, I would hazard to guess that was a lot of the map packs before I came on, because I think that was definitely a theme, and there was definitely like if I did a tavern one or a village one, there were definitely pieces that seemed to go together, but I also tried to make them as modular as possible. I did that with the ship thing too, so you can make a number of different sort of ships rather than this is just a map pack of a ship deck plan that you had to sort of piece together, and save that kind of stuff more for flip mats. But yeah, because once I started doing the very modular and creating a lot of interlinks between various things, always making sure when I had a dungeon thing that would connect to the caverns that we were going to do in a few months. So the more people collected the things, the more that they could go, oh, I can use this with this, and create all sorts of things. But it was very much an Easter egg for a while. People had to figure it out. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with the new product is there's always those transition pieces in the set. There's always an entrance to the dungeon in the forest set, or a road that leads to a paved road in the forest set that will lead to the urban set, and so on. And like Urban Perils is going to have, it's got a sinkhole and you can barely see on the bottom. It's got a sewer stream under it. So, you can like, oh my God, something just came out of the sewers and left this big hole. I guess we better go jump and chase it, or figure out what's going on down there, and lead it on to the next scene of the next adventure.
Oh, we have a question from chat. Lone Dwarf 14 wants to know if there's any plans to make these available on Roll20.
I am not that sure about it. I am. I know they're available digitally for download on the Paizo site, and I've talked to a lot of people who use them on things like Roll20. But as a person who hasn't been playing on virtual tabletops lately, I don't know if I can answer that question.
No,
Other than I imagine you could do it.
I haven't used these specific tiles, but I have used your maps and tiles in Roll20 before, and it's relatively easy to take the digital file and just import it into Roll20 as a background. It's painless. Now, you said you got involved with this like 7 or 8 years ago. What led to you deciding to get involved with the map products? Like, how did that come about?
Basically, I think Jason was doing it and then decided he didn't want to do it. And I had worked on some map products at Wizards of the Coast. The tile products, I had designed one or two of those. And I have a great love of cartography. And so Jason asked me if I would be interested in picking this up. And then I had talks with Jeff Alvarez because he wanted to make sure that I was knowledgeable enough about maps and everything else. I remember I almost had to have like this small interview with Jeff where he asked me questions. By the time he's done, he's like, "Yeah, okay, that guy knows about maps." I'm like, and so, and then it was, because back then the design team was Jason, Sean, and I, and so it was just splitting up because I had just this was probably 6 months after I got hired. And so basically I just did it because Jason didn't have time to do it anymore. And then people really liked my work with it, and I really enjoyed doing it. And so I continued to do it. And then they asked me if I want to do Starfinder, and I'm like, no, I've got enough maps right now. But helped the folks, like told them how I go through the process, and they've got some really good folks to design their maps for them, and they look really great.
So now, am I the one that's off base in that I assumed this is something that the art department handled? Why is it that the design team is handling such a visual project?
Well, there are aspects that the art team does handle with it, right? Like just like anything else. So, for instance, when we do a hardback book, we write art orders. We send those to the art department. They're the ones who commission the art. But just about every scene in a hardback book that you see is somebody on the design team writing that scene and saying, please draw this. And so in a lot of ways, and when I write like an adventure path adventure, part of that is handing over the maps of the various areas so that can go to a designer, a graphic designer, and make it look all pretty, and then they put it in the book. So that's why. It's because we know the game. We know how movement typically works. We know what we can fudge and what we can keep. If you just gave it to an art team, they might not think about creating those connections between different maps, or they might not know something about how dungeons or difficult terrain or doors or everything work. But if you give them really good instructions, they can give that to an artist, and the artist can pump it out. And they can, often they'll come back with questions. They're like, "Do you really want to do this?" And 9 times out of 10, I say yes, and this is the reason why. And then they have a better understanding. So, like, I work with Emily. She's kind of like my, basically I give her the sketches and the design. She comes back with any questions. She gives the stuff to Jason, and then she brings me back sketches, and I take a look at the sketches, and I ask for any changes, which is very rare with Jason because he's so good at following direction. And then improvising when I need him to improvise, like, just make this thing look really cool, and he goes, okay, and he knows how to make it really cool. So it is, it's me and Emily and Jason, and then of course, and then we have the last round of people taking a good last look at it, making sure it's exactly what we want. So while it is very much a team effort, just like everything else at Paizo.
Now,
you did mention the adventures. Go ahead, Pam.
I was just saying that we've had people come on the show before, and they like to show off the before art with their sketches that charitably look like they belong on a refrigerator door with a magnet. You just held up, I know that our audio listeners aren't going to be able to appreciate this, but you just held up something that looked relatively professional. So it looks like you've got a bit of map chops yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I've done some professional cartography, and I enjoy it. I enjoy it myself. I'm nowhere near as talented as Jason is that, but I'm known for making good maps, because some people just don't have that quality, right? But one of the things early on when I started playing role-playing games is, I've loved maps from a very early age, and so half of the fun to me was in creating an adventure site was drawing out the map and then being able to fill it with all sorts of fun and interesting story and combat and mystery encounters as I went on and did it. And way back in the day, I was an illustrator I am way out of practice. I also have painted Paint Masters for the D&D line and the Pathfinder line. So the Rune Giant miniature, I did the Paint Master for that.
Nope, Param's going to get it. I do remember there was a lot of controversy about his pants.
Yeah, well, those people can suck it, because that's the color of his pants in the main artwork.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that was...
He's one of my favorites.
That was fun to paint.
Like, he always stays on display. It's like one of my favorite miniatures ever.
So is that the direction you originally thought you were going in? Were you figuring you would be a visual artist?
When I was very young, yeah. And then a lot of my teachers kept on trying to get me to write, which I absolutely hated. But they really liked what I did, and so eventually I did both. And so, like in college, I was a political cartoonist in the paper, rather controversial one, and then I stopped doing that and writing editorials. Because I figured, because I learned that dumb people don't read, but they will read comics, and so, but I won awards for both of those. So yeah, I've always had that kind of artistic side that I really enjoy doing. I love painting miniatures. I love making maps. I tend to be a fairly visual person.
Mm-hmm. Now,
so you mentioned you're out of practice. How much is this skill nature versus nurture for you?
I'm not sure. I
want a percentage.
Yeah, I don't know if I've got a percentage to you for you. I know that I need bifocals now, which really kind of drives me nuts because I've got once upon a time my upfront vision was excellent, and I don't need them to read or anything else. But the period where I need to put a miniature in front of my face, now I need to. I've got either a magnifying glass or glasses to do, and I hate growing old like that. So it's like the darn body's just shutting down. I would say it's a good 50-50 for me. Like if I were to try to sit down and do an illustration like I did when I was younger, I would probably get really frustrated because I haven't drawn like a person for years. And I used to be really good at drawing people. But a lot of that is practice and honing your work and everything else. I'm still a pretty decent miniature painter. Not like top of the line miniature painter, but pretty good.
Now I've seen also on the design team, I've seen Jason Bowman do these like really fantastic battle mats. Is that like the secret interview question? Is like the secret test to even be on the design team is you have to be amazing at battle mats?
No, in fact, I don't know. Logan's got a really good eye for art and graphic design. And he did a pretty good map when he was doing his run through of his adventure. So he's got some artistic talent. Jason definitely does, and he was an architect before he got into game design, and so that really hones it. On the other end, that is not Mark's talent. Like, he's like, I can't do maps like that. But Mark's talent lies in other directions. So, I think a lot of, it's amazing how many people I've met in the industry over the last 2 decades that I've been on that have a fair amount of artistic talent, or they just don't. It's very rarely in between. Like they can sit there and at least draw good maps and paint good miniatures, or they're like, I don't even know how you guys do that.
I can show you some nice in between art, I tell you.
Now, when you let's go about what makes a good battle mat, since a lot of the products that you're working on are the flip maps, the flip tiles, the old map tiles. What does make a good battle mat as opposed to, say, good world cartography?
Well, I always come at it with don't make it boring. 2, make it so, whenever possible, make it so with just a single look, a GM goes, I know what to run on this. So, for instance, in one of the ones I just got done, which is the Tavern Multipack, I have this sort of pirate tavern on an island, and there's this cave with this idol and everything else. And Eric was like, this is really cool, because if you had a bar fight, you could have enemies coming from this direction and that direction. I think a lot of it is the same as a good adventure. Try not to make only one path in or out. Always have kind of surprises and ways and features that players will latch onto and go, what is that? Like, where does that go? How the heck do we deal with that? And so the goal of a good battle mat is to help your GM tell half the story without saying a word. That's
nice.
That's my opinion, anyway. Mm-hmm. Until the players go, what is that? And then it's like, well, as you get closer, you notice. So,
what about animal companions? Feels like a lot of time players complain that maps are just not made for their animal companions.
Well, I guess it depends on the animal companions.
Let's say a mastodon.
A mastodon.
No, let's say a horse.
Well, I try to make my areas larger, and part of that has to do with my own preference. I like large encounter areas. Sometimes I've noticed with Jason maps, he likes these 5 foot by 5 foot wide corridors, and I'm like, bleh. I want there to be ranks and everything else. But I remember a couple of the bridges I did. They're like, I can't get giants on the bridge. I want a flip mat where I can have giants on a bridge. And so we did a bigger bridge or something like that, where it's all like, yep, I made this so you can get giants on your bridge. So most battle mats, just because of the size constraints, if you've got anything large, if you've got a huge animal companion, it's like, well, I'll try to help you as much as I can, but maybe you should think about getting a smaller, compact animal companion. It helps the environment.
Now, what about style versus practicality? So, a nice rounded corner adds a lot of confusion of what can fit where as the other side of those corners, and diagonals can always add complications to encounters, especially when reach comes into it. So, How do you factor all that into your designs?
I try to be practical wherever possible, but a lot of times I just say, screw it, this looks better, this looks more exciting. It was one of my early ship ones. I created this first sketch of, I wanted a boarding action, and I wanted a really dynamic boarding action. So I had one ship coming in, and then the other ship coming in at a diagonal where it rammed the other one, and there were just pieces of the ship kind of straight out. I really liked that design, and I think it was Rob McCurry. He's like, I hate moving on diagonals. People are gonna yell at you for this. You should have it just side by side. And I'm like, oh, that's a good point. And I did it, and I didn't like the map nearly as much, but it was more useful on sort of grid space. I think if I had to do that one over, I'd say, yeah, screw you guys. I'm going to do this cool, dynamic, 2 ships together. And that's why we have diagonal movement rules, and you're just going to have to deal with it because it's part of the game. But I'm also one of those heretics that I think diagonal movement should just be 1 square for 1 square rather than the way Pathfinder does. I know, terrible.
The math is the same, actually, if you run the numbers.
Yeah, it is pretty. So back when I was working at Wizards of the Coast, and we were doing the 3.5 revision, and I was on that development team. Skip Williams and I just had this knockdown, drag-out argument because I'm like, can we just do it this way? And he's like, what about Pythagoras, Stephen? And I'm like, he's dead. And he's like, you just can't do it. You just can't do it. And I told him, and he made him so mad. And I was all like, we stole a tax of opportunity from Blood Bowl, and Blood Bowl does it, so it'll be just fine.
I didn't know that that's where the attacks of opportunity rules came from.
A lot of it is the Death Zone in the second Death Zone supplements. If you read it, you're like, oh yeah, that's a tax of opportunity. That's exactly. attacks of opportunity on a grid. So, but Skip and I have, of course, kissed and made up since those trying days. But I mean, and Jason just thinks I'm crazy for that. But and in fact, I had to run the playtest for a whole bunch of retailers and distributors in Chicago. And not only did I have to do that, I had to deal with a whole bunch of folks that had never played a role-playing game before, had never played Pathfinder before, and do it in 20 minutes. And I did not use the diagonal rules for that game. I'm just like, yep, just, that's fine. Just move it like that. Because in order to do that with that amount of speed, right, I can just see the looks on their face. So the second one is how much again? And it's like, no, just move where you want. It's this many squares, do it like this. But
we will convince you, Ryan, of the benefit of the fire cube.
Of the what? The fire cube?
The fire cube. Yeah.
If you,
I do not understand the reference.
If
you do a fireball with not counting diagonals Pathfinder way, right? But just you end up when you fire fireball, you just could put a square down. Not the ragged sort of thing. And everybody's like, well, what do you do? And then I always take out the protractor and show them how it works and talk about fuzzy math and everything else and go, it's fine. And they either believe me or not. So
I've seen the math.
You will sooner convince me of hex grids than diagonal single move.
Now, hex grids.
Yes.
Right.
Don't even start me on hex grids.
Hex
really? Grids are really good for Hexploration. I love Hexploration, but yeah, I do not want to run combat on hex grids.
I like hex grids for giant open fields and also giant robots, but when you start to try to draw straight walls, it becomes a nightmare.
Yeah, that is the compromise of the hex grid. You either live in a weird hexagonal-shaped roomed world, or just every space gets cut off. Actually, can we talk about walls? Because that's one of the problems I have when I'm drawing maps, is figuring out the depth of a wall. How do you do it?
Well, with the maps I do, I tend to try to do it 5-foot walls, except for when I don't. And so it's very much easy to do that when you're talking about dungeon walls. And if you take a look at actual subterranean things that have been carved into the earth, right, you want those kind of thick walls. Either that or you've got to sort of put up fake concrete walls, which don't work as well in kind of a dungeon setting. But when you start talking about wood walls, then a wall can inhabit those lines rather than whole squares. And so that's how I tend to do it.
And what about something in between?
So
like
very thin wood
fortress
walls.
Oh, yeah.
I would not. Oh, well, fortress walls are actually pretty thick. A lot of times they're about 10 feet, if not 15 feet thick.
I'm a little nervous about some lag. Can we just do a sound test? When I say make some, you say noise. Make some.
Noise.
Make some.
Bring the noise.
Okay, it's only a second or two, so it must have just been a momentary glitch. All right, there's got to be something in between a fortress wall and a wooden wall that's like...
Oh, yeah, dungeon wall.
The problem. Less than that, though.
No. I mean...
No, there's nothing.
No,
there's literally nothing
not.
between a wooden wall and a stone wall.
I mean,
all right.
You're talking about a cinder block wall with insulation? I mean...
Yeah, at least I find when drawing maps, right? That's I find that those three sizes of wall, 10 foot, 5 foot, or a wooden wall across the line, or something, or like a paper wall or whatnot. I find that those work really well. I also like doing diagonal corridors and stuff like that, which drives folks nuts. It's all like, what about those half spaces? And I'm, and I go, well, yeah, you go ahead and stand there. They're like, what? And so I might give you a minus for it, or depending on the situation, but or you might, if it's small enough, I'll be all like, yeah, you can stand in that square, but you're squeezing in there. It's like, oh, well, forget that. It's like, well, then don't go in that square. Although those things aren't officially in the rules. Sometimes you've got to ad hoc things, kids. That's the great thing about a role-playing game.
I'm fine with diagonals. I'm fine with partial walls and stuff. Where you all always get me is when I'm having to reproduce a map and you do these gigantic curves in some of the adventure path maps, and I'm just like, oh, good lord.
Well, then you'll like Dungeon Vaults because I put a lot of those kind of curved walls in there.
As long as you're drawing the curves, I'm cool with it.
Right. Yeah, and as somebody who can do a pretty good job on a drawing on a battle mat, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, one of the things in my Starfinder adventure, I've got a lot of kind of curved and weird walls because I wanted it to look all science fiction-y. But the other thing that I did is I made that map the exact same size as a flip mat. So I told the Starfinder team, I'm like, yeah, if you ever need a side of a flip mat, and you want a little starbase, do that one. And then people will love you more because they won't have to draw my crazy little curved science fiction walls.
Yeah, if I had to draw out the bridge of the Enterprise, or the Enterprise D at least, where it's nothing but rounded angles, I would just stop playing. Or I would find a projector and just screen cap some actual Enterprise set images.
I mean, the great thing about it too is you can get a string, and you can do it that way. You might slip a little bit, and there's all sorts of like little tricks you can do. But if you don't have a steady hand,
I do not.
Yeah, then I'm
seen
sorry,
Ryan's
man, you're
maps.
just screwed.
Yes.
So
I've seen me like rigorously counting spaces, drawing exactly as I counted, and then ending up with this weird checkerboard map. And it's like, where did I go wrong?
What were some of the unique design challenges with the new format, with making sure the tiles connect, or designing for this, and what should be in a set?
Well, the great thing about what should be in a set is I had so many more tiles to work with that it was nice having a little bit more room for those. The biggest thing is trying to figure out what are the general shapes that I need to make sure that it all fits together, and that involved doing a lot of prototyping, where basically I just I took out sheets of graph paper, just normal size graph paper. I cut them into 6x6 squares, and then just fooled around with a highlighter. Like, okay, if I make corridors that go like this, and I have these configurations, how well does this work? That's not going to work. I need to toss out. Or that's repetitive. I don't need both of these because as you flip them around, they're the same kind of thing. So the prototyping aspect, mostly for the flip tiles, is really important, just to make sure it all fits together. And so that, you end up, I end up having to get out glue because now I want to see how they all work on the double sides. And so I end up having this very minuscule, tiny version of a flip map product, and then end up going, yeah, that doesn't work, and writing notes on the various pieces before I sit there and I print out like a fuller size file to sort of draw it out, figure out what it is. And then, because you have enough sameness, especially with the dungeon and the forest thing. So like if I have a T-shaped corridor, I'm going to want a few of those. I'm going to want about 4 of those. But and I can save a little money by just repeating, but I don't want to repeat all of them because you don't want every T-square in every single dungeon or every dungeon corner to look exactly different. Or if I've got a room wall, like I might want 5 of those, but I want 3 different varieties of those, just so it doesn't get boring. And so a lot of the end part is, okay, I've got all of the tiles that I want, and it's actually less than my sides. And how do I fit in the scheme that I then give to the graphic designer, to Emily, and say this is the order they should be in. And then, of course, when she's done, and she does a great job, I double check just out of concern because she always does it right. And in fact, the last one, she's like, I've noticed that you have a problem in your scheme. Is this on purpose? And I'm like, no, that's a mistake, Emily. Yeah, fix that. Thanks for catching it. And and so there are times when I'm working on the new project, I'm like, those damn flip mats used to be a hell of a lot easier. I just had to come up with 18 of them and I was done. And now I have to like come up with, for an expansion, 48 different sides, and I have to make sure they all work together, and then I have to figure out the scheme and everything else, and it's all like, so folks at home, this is the hell that we go through to make a good product for you guys. We make more works for ourselves and then kick ourselves. Mm-hmm. But the feedback I've gotten from it has been absolutely phenomenal. Mm-hmm. No. Hell, even Mike Merles likes it. Mm-hmm.
There is, now that I found, I knew that you were big into maps. I didn't know that you were manning the whole flip map part of it as well. One second. So a project I want to ask about is, were you lead on the Emerald Spire massive pack of maps?
No, that's one of the few that I did not do. And that was, I think actually, I remember because Rich Baker was working at Goblin Works at the time and worked on that. He came down and he's like, Steven, do you have a template for flip mats? And I'm like, no, but it's only 24 by 30. You count 24 squares, 30 squares, right? Draw a rectangle, figure it out. And he was like, oh, okay. And he looked like a little dejected when he went out. I'm like, I'll draw the template for you, man, right? So I think all of the various designers did that, even the outside ones that kind of didn't get it. And I think actually it might have been Logan at the time who had to sort of figure out how to square that circle. So yeah, which from what I understand got a little challenging. Why do you ask? Just out of curiosity.
I was just wondering what the production was like, because you were talking about normally you only have to do 18 flip maps, and I'm like, and that was a whole year's worth of flip maps at one go.
Yeah. So luckily somebody else did that. But but yet again, one of like city maps, of course, take longer, right? Because I've got there's just a lot more architecture. Have to figure out how it works. So like the multi-pack for the taverns, I was just like, oh, geez. Or it's like, pub crawl or something like that. Anytime it's a city one, I'm just like, oh, this is going to take a while. And it's forests, and it's all like, oh, I can draw a forest all day, but so that's a lot easier.
I almost feel guilty because every time in the conversation you're like, oh, I have to work on that. I'm like, those are my favorite maps. I loved pub crawl.
And that is why I have to work on them, because those are people's favorite. Well, I mean, because it's very hard to put together a convincing city mostly on the fly, and so a lot of people can put together a halfway convincing dungeon on the fly or halfway convincing forest on the fly. It's better when they look pretty, but it's all like, oh, now I've got to figure out a city, and I end up going, I'll take a lot of look at a lot of pictures of various city layouts and various cityscapes and buildings from Europe, all over Europe and Asia, for inspiration on those things, so that they look you can use them to game, and then they actually look like a city, right, rather than something that's it's good enough for a city. And so, yeah, of course those things are popular. I'm just wondering how many taverns adventurers are actually going to. Like, don't you just start in a tavern and then you never go to the tavern again?
No, it becomes a home base.
No, yeah, absolutely. And so every time I'm done with the taverns, I'm like, wow, that's a really good tavern. Like, I really like I can already think about the kind of fun adventures I'd run in it. But at the start of every single tavern product, I go, what tavern am I going to do this time?
If we're talking about If we're talking about taverns, I want to know about a specific one. Waterfront Tavern, and why has it been drawn so many times?
It was drawn so many times. It's only really been drawn 2 times. And the reason why I did it the second time was PFS was using it so much that the original flip mat sold out. It was before we started doing classics and everything else. And so there was at least one, if not more, very popular adventures that people kept on going. I can't buy this waterfront tavern. It was going for something stupid online too, like $100 or $200 or some outrageous sort of price. And so I'm like, well, we get so many requests for this. I'm going to do a stealth redraw of this, so people can actually get that map again. And then we did the classics line. So it's actually, that particular tavern has been in 3 different map products, and mine's a little different. It takes up a little less space, and whatnot. But that's the reason why. And the fact that we produce flip mats and then we just let them sell out, mostly for PFS, caused an awful lot of problems, and that's why we ended up doing the classics line, because we take a look at the basically the maps that sold out, and we reprint them so people can get them again, so they're not paying outrageous prices from third-party buyers on eBay or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Why is PFS one of the only lines that tends to reuse the map packs a lot?
One of the reasons is purely practical, is they don't have the art budget that, say, like an Adventure Path does. So the Adventure Path has a larger art budget, and they can do other maps. One of my goals with the flip tiles is even if other adventure writers can do it, each has an alphanumeric code, each side does. And so you can write basically, here's a list of the maps of the various tiles that built this map, and you can even have them on the map. But even then, I think it'll probably be Pathfinder Society that uses that far more than the Adventure Path stuff. Mm-hmm. I think there's just, starting from Dragon Magazine and then moving into the Adventure Paths, there's just this idea that part of the value is you get this new map that Ryan can't reproduce because it's got too many curvy walls.
Oh, even straight walls. I literally, in 3rd grade, my teacher accused me of lying when I told him I used a ruler, which I totally did, because I cannot draw a straight line with a ruler.
Now,
so yeah, it adds value to the adventure, but doesn't it take away some of the value from these map packs that are supposed to be reusable and all-purpose?
I don't know. I guess in a lot of ways we see that. We know that Pathfinder Society is one thing. People who run Adventure Paths are another, and still the grand majority of people run their own stuff, and they're always looking for tools. And the great thing about both flip mats and map packs is they work whether or not you're running Pathfinder or another fantasy role-playing game. And so one of the great things that I love when I flip through Facebook is somebody will be playing a game, and it'll be Pathfinder or some other fantasy role-playing game, and it'll be on my flip mat using miniatures that I did Paint Masters for, and I'll be all like, oh, that's like a whole bunch of work. And if they're running either a character or an adventure that I wrote, that's even, that's on top of it. It's like the SRM table. Just got it all. So that's a lot of fun.
And my subscription to the map, the flip mat specifically, has made me a little bit of a superhero at the local PFS, because it's just like literally show up and then all the maps are there, and I make sure all my team has maps, and it's just like, and I didn't have to do any work. I didn't have to do anything.
Right.
I
mean, it does make it easier, and it makes the table look really good, and it focuses attention.
So. I have one question about the new dungeon though. Where are the doors?
So I tend not to put on doors, so you can draw the doors. Personally, and if you've seen me post pictures of like my lunch game that I'm running, I get Dwarven Forge doors and then just stand them up on the tiles. I'll get 3-dimensional doors, and that's what I do. but for the most part, it's so you can put your doors wherever it is you want to put your doors, whether or not it's with a permanent marker, which cleans away from this stuff. You can use permanent marker, dry erase, or wet erase markers on that, or if you go the route of using three-dimensional pre-painted or doors that you painted.
Mm-hmm.
Or your new pawns. You've got the
or the new
pawns.
pawns, yeah, the terrain pawns that we're doing as well.
So I'm glad. The other reason I'm glad you switched to this new format is you made the old tiles dry erasable, but I never trust myself to remember which one of those tiles is dry erasable and which one of those is from my older sets. And the last thing I want to do is put a big black mark over Elven Village.
Well, right, yeah, that would be bad. So yeah, these are totally from the get-go. Unless somehow we get cheapy and decide not to do it that way anymore, and then you'll be in the same problem. But I doubt that will happen.
I got one last question about the flip tiles.
Mm-hmm.
How did you decide what's on the flip?
So it depends on the set. So basically, the way the dungeons is structured is corridors are on one side, and room areas are on the other. And I figured with 48 tiles, you'll be able to find the corridors that you want. And then I split them in a way where, which is one of the ways you need the scheme, is so I wouldn't have on that T-junction is always the side of the room or the corner of the room. You could always find the room pieces you needed and the corridor pieces you needed just by flipping. The forest one is similar with trails and open areas or full areas of trees. The urban is going to be really interesting because on one side it has the roofs, and then when you flip it, it has the interiors.
Oh, nice.
Ooh, I like that a lot.
Yeah. When I figured out I could do that, I was jumping up and down. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. So now, unfortunately, there is some conceits, like you'll get the insides of even the rooms across the street, right? It's all like, but the way it works out is pretty fun.
And I mean, you could always just get a second set and then just cover up the ones that are covered. Maybe get 3 sets just for the fun of it.
I think kids should buy like 5 or 6 sets.
You joke. But
just to have them around.
You joke, but I'm already contemplating my second set of all of these.
I only half joke.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes I have to admit, and I did this with flip tiles as well, and I'm like, you can live with 1. You're probably going to want 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of the expansions might be that way, where it's all like, I can almost do exactly what I want with this, but if I got that second one, it's the collectible tile game. No, it's not. It's not.
Oh gosh, that might be the one thing that turns me against the set is like, why did you randomize them in blind packs?
Oh right, no, we wouldn't do that yet.
All right.
Now you mentioned earlier using a string to draw round corners, which is just brilliant, and you casually mentioned that there's many other tricks like that, and then did not give me any other tricks. I need some more of those tricks, Stephen.
Well, there are all sorts of things in your kitchen, Crisco cans, CDs, things like that to help you make those kind of curves. They do make. Do I have one around here? It's very useful. It's a ruler that you can bend. And so you can bend it in certain shapes and then put it down and then use that as a straight edge.
And it keeps the shape you bend? So it's got a pipe cleaner skeleton?
Yeah, basically.
That sounds cool. Is it expensive?
I bought mine years ago, but I think I spent $15 on it.
Okay. It's reasonable. Is it a yardstick or a foot?
It's not a yardstick. I would definitely say it's a foot.
Okay. All right.
I think it's a foot. Maybe it's a little bit more than a foot. I used it once to clear out my vacuum, and so I think it's actually more than a foot. right? Because I'm like, Jesus. So
I'm
And it
here
worked
like,
just fine
man,
for
I
that
really
too.
need to get one of these. Do they come longer and stuff when you're using it on your vacuum?
And this is
that's. I've got a bunch like I've got a bunch of toys at my house, and every once in a while I'm like, I really wish I had this tool, and it's like, no, I know I have something like that around, something from a component from some weird game or some kind of art supply or miniature supply I picked up, and 9 times out of 10 I have exactly what I need somewhere in the house.
Now, this is a good time to remind everyone that we record these episodes live on Twitch in front of a live Twitch audience. If you are in the chat right now and have any questions for myself, Ryan, or of course our wonderful guest, go ahead and type them in the chat. We'll be collecting them throughout the episode and forwarding them on.
I hope people don't have questions for me about cartography. 'Cause
Right.
if I ever had a blind spot.
Yeah, I've seen
Ryan, can you come over to our house and draw crazy straight lines that aren't actually straight?
Yeah, okay, yes, that. It could be
that you
entertaining
could do.
just watching me fail.
You've done Rise of the Rune Lords, right, Ryan?
I have.
Right,
yes.
right. In book 5, the sloth dungeon. How did that go for your group?
Book 5 is where we got TPK'd. I don't think
good.
we made it to the sloth dungeon.
Oh, it
We
may
definitely
be
did Lust, and then we did the room, I guess, Vanity.
It may
And
be
that's where it ended.
Were you the GM? Did
I
you
was the
teach
GM.
him so you didn't have to draw that room? That's not
No,
cool.
that's not why I did it. That's just,
You saw that
Added
map
bonus.
and you're like, screw this. They're all dying tonight.
Right. Anna Meyer
explains
in
everything.
chat is saying she wants to see one of my maps. I will draw a map, and I will post it on our website just to show you. I have no visual sense. I have no ability to draw a straight line. I'm just sad.
Yeah, don't worry, Anna's not going to laugh at you. I think she's just curious.
I don't know about that. I think there might be some laughing at me going on. See, she just said, haha.
Oh,
I
was
Literally, as we were talking about her not laughing.
wrong.
I look forward to the Facebook comments.
So, Stephen, we did ask to have you for an hour, and we're reaching that hour. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good.
All right. We also mentioned that we could talk a little bit about 2E. I actually was expecting chat to be banging our door down to ask questions about 2E, but chat's been just politely quiet tonight. So
I have that effect on people. They're often politely quiet around me.
So, Param, you said that you had your last question about the flip tiles. Did you have any other questions related to cartography?
I have if I had my way, this would be a 3-hour interview, and we would just talk about maps because I love cartography and maps, and I really want to start. Like, I wish we had could have had Stephen there when we were talking about 2.5D terrain, since he mentioned using the Dwarven Forge stuff on the tiles. But I don't think our audience is in it for the 3-hour all map episode.
Probably not.
All right, then. Do you want to talk about the 1.3 update?
Yeah, sure.
So that hit, and that seems extremely well received. Yeah. What inspired this update, and what were you expecting from that? What kind of reaction were you expecting from it?
Well, I don't know. I try not to expect a reaction because it's often who knows. It can be very random, and it was funny is when it was dropped because I tend to watch the Facebook group a lot. There was a lot of sort of. Like the way I saw it was a lot of gnashing of teeth, and I guess the Paizo message boards were a lot more positive about it. So I'm just like, oh, I don't even think.
Oh dear!
I want to look at Paizo message boards. I'm just going to sit here and drink for a little while and then go to bed. But I'm, I am very happy that folks like a lot of the changes that we put in. I think they were very happy to see the archetypes for multi-classing all the way through. Our realization that the fighter dedication was a little too good, and coming up with a way to get around that. Out of combat healing with the medicine skill, I think is a very strong move. I heard some things that were like, that means you're spending 1.3 minutes per per person, and that doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm like, well, that actually tends to be the average speed for triage in the military, so I think we're fine. Or at least that's what they shoot for, right? Of course, it depends on how wounded you are and everything else. And triage is a little different. I don't mean to minimize the complaint. And those are kind of interesting things we'll take a look at. We've always got to sort of balance verisimilitude with, stuff that people will accept on the game table. The death and dying rules, I was like, well, this is the third one, and there are things I like about this death and dying rules, and there are things I wasn't quite sure about the death and dying, but that seems to be going really well, and a bunch of the smaller changes that we've made. I was very happy that they're being relatively well received, and had a couple of sort of, you're not listening to us, and I'm like, we spent an awful lot of time coming out and talking to you and then doing these updates to not be listening to you. If we were listening to you, we'd be all like, screw it, we're done, we'll go home. So, all in all, I'm very happy. We'll see what people think when which we're still working on, our solution to resonance, or what takes over resonance and everything else, or at least our idea on what that has to do. I had this guy on the internet, and it's like, you guys are just going to do resonance. I'm like, maybe you missed it, but I wrote an entire blog on what we were trying to fix with resonance, and saying, and you guys didn't like it, right? There are people even who understood it sat there and went, it might be a bit too much. So yay! I'm glad that people are liking, the direction that the updates are taking.
Yeah. What were people gnashing their teeth over? Because I really did not see much negativity towards this update.
It was so it was really kind of funny, is because for weeks and weeks and weeks we heard that nobody wants to play cleric. Like, you need to find another way to do healing, out of combat healing, and that's what Cure Light Wound was doing. And it's all like, and those are kind of good points. And there is still some of the background math that I'm not convinced with even combat healing, but this was a nice way to sort of have something a little bit more interesting in the medicine skill to solve the problem of, like, we don't have a dedicated healer, and we want to know, like, how we can limp through this adventure, or at least do well in this adventure. Because I have this skill and I'm dedicating stuff in the skill. I should get something for it that's a little bit better. And then some people are like, I don't think it's very realistic, or now they want to create this kind of. So like everything in the game, people will be very vocal about what they see as a problem, and then you'll go, that's really interesting. You guys are being very vocal about what you think is a problem. Let's take a second look at it and see if we can find a good solution. And then when you find a solution to it, there's a whole bunch of people who didn't think it was a problem, right? All of a sudden they get mad and they start bringing it up, and it's like, and there are days when you're like, oh, geez, and everything sounds louder on the internet. Because, sometimes people lack a certain amount of tact, and there is definitely a crowd who just assumes that we're not listening, and then when I come in and I start talking to them, they're like, oh, I guess you guys are, actually coming in and listening and responding to stuff. I don't know what to do with this. So at least on the Facebook page, there was a lot of sort of first reaction, what the hell is this, and what is Paizo doing with the game, which mellowed actually pretty quickly over time as people started to read it and figure out the implications.
I know that over on the Reddit community is when the patch dropped and everybody saw the bent wounds. It was like heralds of angels singing. So it's interesting how the different communities, depending on where they're at, react differently.
Yes. Which is really the difficulty with building a new game system and everything else, and mostly, the kind that we're trying to make, where we are asking for this kind of feedback, and realizing a very human trait of not very many gamers agree, and every gamer thinks that everybody agrees with them. And so, in trying to filter out that nice middle ground that makes the most people happy, or at least content, and realizing that sometimes that there's a point in any sort of playtest process where you're just like, oh, come on, guys, really, really, like. And you just like, I think there was a point last week. I'm like, I just want to take 3 weeks of vacation and read books and draw maps and paint miniatures and not deal with this. But of course, I can't do that because we're in the middle of a play test. We have to put out this game just because, yeah, everybody's got their own opinion on it. And when you ask their opinion, they will give it to you.
Now, you did mention that this is the third take on the death and dying rules.
Yep.
Was there really that much issue with the negative hit points from first edition?
Well, there is some issues with the negative hit points with third edition. That it tends to work out really well at lower levels and very swingy at higher levels. And so, in a lot of ways, what we're searching for is a system that keeps the same amount of swing, or actually increases your chances as you go into higher levels. Because in P1, if you're 15th level, it's very easy to get knocked down below that point, and you're just like, oh crap, I died. Right, the guy just kind of one-shotted me. When at lower levels, it's all like, oh, I've got a few rounds, guys. You can help get me up. And so that's kind of what we're trying to solve with that issue. The funny thing about it is, as we go through the playtest, a lot of the issues that most people kind of sit there and scratch their head at that we're trying to fix with the game really are ways to make the game more playable at higher levels. Now, there are issues with the game right now that it doesn't really fix things at higher levels, even though it's on the right path. Like, for instance, you like at 20th level and you want to heal somebody, you're rolling 20d8, which I would have to search around my house to find a 20d8. We're going to have to find, and I have a lot of dice, and we're going to have to find a better way to fix that expression, and a couple other things. But it's those higher level games is where not only is your character more complicated and you have more choices and you have more items, which is going to slow down gameplay to begin with, but the math breaks down. Partially to do with the fractional progression of the old system, partially to do with what we did with bonuses in the first game, where sometimes you had high bonuses to shore up defenses, but nobody took them for that. They took the high bonuses to increase the thing that they were actually really good at anyway, to make sure that they would hardly ever fail at it. And so I think a lot of the things that make people scratch their head is going to pay out dividends later on, but that's not what they're playing right now, right? They're playing the low levels and everything else, and they're having to deal with a new system, and they're wondering why it's so different in some ways. I'm constantly pointing out it's actually not as different as you think. It's presented different in some ways, but all of these things were in P1. They were just hidden all over the place. And so lately I felt like I've been online a lot explaining to folks, no, actually DCs were crazy and all over the board in P1 too. No, actually you added your level to a lot of things, or at least some fraction of your level to a lot of things. That outstripped your other bonuses by a great amount, actually very early in the game. And you didn't notice it because it was over here and over here and over here and over here, and we came up with one system where you could figure out what your bonus was. And some of that is very much created to help with new players, help with creating computer tools, and help with doing better localization when Pathfinder gets translated into other languages. Right, it's kind of a three-pronged approach to to our hopes is to make it be able to appeal to more people in those three different aspects.
I do have a little anecdote about localization. English has an absurd amount of words for person who is magical.
Yes.
Like, I know when Dungeons & Dragons first or second edition was translated to French, wizard became sorcière, which is like literally sorcerer in French. And then when a sorcerer was added to the game, they were like,
well, I mean,
started using that word.
Here's like one of the big complaints that I get all the time, and I kind of roll my eyes at, rightly or wrongly, is like, now everything's a feat. Before it was a talent, and it was a power, and it was a knack, and everything else. And I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of languages that don't have nearly that many words for a feat-like thing. And so if we can streamline it in this way, not only is it easier for others, it's like, this is how you read feats. Here are the various types of feats in the game. You're always going to read it the same way, because when we did, rogue talents, it was a feat-like object, but it was presented in a totally different way, which ended up getting, people would end up, asking questions about, does this mean this way? Because if it was written in this sort of, because feats are written in this way, and this is written over here, and barbarian powers are written in this way. And it's all like, we want you to be able to look at a thing and know how to read it. And then when we give it to a programmer, it's all like, all of these things work in the same way, and all of the exceptions sit here and here. And so you can build something right there and just go with that template, no matter where it kind of sits. It's just about when it comes in. And then for localization, it works the same kind of way.
Now, I am a programmer, and some of the things that I have programmed is, implementations in game tools for Pathfinder. It's how parent spell cards came into existence. People seem to like that.
Oh, I remember.
And one of the things I noticed immediately with PF2E in the language you use, it was intentional that this was one of the goals is to make it easier for computers to understand?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's in a lot of ways. So, I mean, I can already tell when people are going to read this, I'm going to get a lot of cries of foul. It's like, I'm having a hard time understanding this. Well, because you've been dealing with the same system for 20 years, and so it's like second hat to you. But new players, programmers, and folks who are trying to translate it into other languages, some of that streamlining is our best take at helping those people out, and trying to use the same language wherever possible. We did a bit sort of mix up with other traits. If you knew what traits were in P1, traits are a lot different in P2. And I think sometimes we thought we were being clever by finding a new way of using a well-worn term, which may have actually made people really confused in some instances. But yeah. Needless to say, like, I end up reading a whole lot, and my girlfriend's like, "You are so incredibly patient," and I don't know if that's true. But reading a whole bunch of stuff about pragmatic, pragmatic is probably more to do with it. But people kind of wondering, like, why did you make it so different? And it's like every change we did was for a reason. And that doesn't mean that we can't back up on some of those reasons or reevaluate some of those reasons and create something that you're going to enjoy a little bit more. But this game has a lot of goals. And part of the goals is to make a game that's going to last for at least 10 more years, right? I mean, that people want to play. And if we fail at that, right, I guess I'll become a professional killer. I don't know. Like, I'll have to find another career.
Well, that's
go back to
than
illustrating before killing.
It's a growth industry. It's my gross point blank humor.
You might be actually. I have a really. It's not related to the playtest, but it's related to something you said earlier, and I kind of wondered about this. You mentioned the word feat and talent, and people talking about the difference. Going back to when feats were first introduced in the 3.3.5 era, Why the word feet? Where did that come from?
Oh, I have no idea. Well, that was 3.0, and so I started Wizards of the Coast in 2000, which was the release of 3.0. And I had seen some early drafts through the RPGA and stuff like that, but I don't know why they settled on the word feet, other than it seemed like non-magical. Was it? And so. And now it's just kind of stuck, for better or for worse. In my copious free time, I work on lately I pick at a game that if you took a look at, you'd see some very similar structures. It uses a 3-action economy, which I designed for Unchained, and other stuff like that. I tend to use the word talent for that one. Everything's kind of split up into talents, partially because I wanted to find a word that sort of jived with my thoughts on things better, and I thought talent worked really well. And so it'll have, but I'll split it up. You'll have racial talents or ancestral talents and class talents, and then general talents. Everybody knows everybody who plays Pathfinder and other similar role-playing games knows what a feat is. So
right, you mentioned it because one of the goals was training this to new players, and one of the things I often have a hard time with, like actual brand new players that never touched the game in my life, and I do that a lot because of my role as a venture officer for PFS, is we get to the thing and then you need to pick your feats, and then they're like, "What's a feat?" And I'm like, well, it's, I try to explain the rules concept, and what does feat mean? And I don't know.
Feats and ability.
Yes. All right. And sorry for the tangent, everyone.
Stephen, did we lose you? Oh, okay, you were frozen for a second.
No, I'm sorry. In fact, I didn't hear most of that. But what was it basically? People are like, why the hell is it called a feat?
Well, I have a hard. That's one of the things with new players. It's like, oh, it's a feat, and I'm like, what is a feat? And I just like the origin of the word, and I that's where I always get tripped up. And so, so I was just curious since we've always called it that and where it came from. But yeah,
and unfortunately, that's before my time. You would probably have to ask Jonathan Tweet, but a lot of times, because Jonathan's a friend of mine and I see him every so often, and then I always ask Jonathan, I'm like, Jonathan, why did you guys do this in the creation of 3rd edition? And he always goes, I don't remember, Stephen, right? That was a long time ago. And I'm like, all right, I was hoping you could help me out with the thing.
Oh, it is crazy to think about how long ago that really is now.
I know, I was very young.
Trying to come up with a name for your boy band at the time.
Right. No, absolutely. No, I was more a metalhead all the time anyway. There's no way I would have been making boy bands unless I was made to infiltrate the boy band guild so we could, beat up boy bands or something.
So when the playtest launched, it had this very rigid schedule that was related to Doomsday Dawn. Do you find it helpful? How do you feel that's affected the way the playtest has been going?
Well, in a lot of ways, it's very helpful to us because each adventure was structured to test something, and then we ask, at least with the survey questions, we ask specific questions, and then we get some really good data. And it's that mix of data and people talking, sometimes often complaining on the internet, that give us kind of the whole picture that we were looking at before. Because if we did play test before, we didn't have a whole lot of data, and we had a whole bunch of people who were either playing or just commenting. And so, and we want information on how actually people are playing. And a lot of people who go onto the message boards and everything else, they've been very candid about how they've been playing and everything else. And we love that kind of information. We also like information about just what you think about the rules. But we knew that we wanted a little bit more scientific approach with this one. and was able to suss out things about the audience and the play of each adventure that were very difficult to do in sort of the scattershot of the message boards and other places where people were putting their thoughts online. I know some people are like, I don't understand why, the surveys are so rigid. That's exactly why the surveys are so rigid. And I want to just give you my opinion, and it's all like, well, we have whole message boards for that, and we do read that, and there's other places on the internet that we're going out and listening to what you have to say. So that was our two-pronged approach. Now, one of our chief worries, even going even from the start, is it's pretty aggressive. Most people do not play at that pace, and the ones that do are a little bit more casual players than a specific adventure that meant to play test certain aspects of the game. There's a chapter that's coming out that really talks about, or really sort of tests, mid-level characters' ability to keep on adventuring when they're getting the living crap beat out of them, right? And by the end of that adventure, we expect at least 90% of people to be dead. And there is now this thought that it's all like, well, that's a lot. That's fun for me, right? I love those kind of adventures, but that's not fun for most of the fan base. They'll be all like, we died in that adventure and you guys suck. And it's all like, we expect to get a lot of that. And some of the harder encounters, even my adventure Red Flags, which is a little bit more of a social encounter adventure and everything else, it's got a couple of encounters in there that, it'll clean your clock. And even as people who are going faster than we expected playing that, they complain about the last encounter. They're like, oh my God, what did you do, right? Because I'm mean and I like killing characters. No, not really. So it's helping us in a way, in a big way, actually. But I do think it's probably a little too quick for most of our fan base, who unfortunately is, some of which is in the middle of their Starfinder campaign, some of which is trying to catch up on the coolest adventure path that they never got to run or play and stuff like that. And playtesting can be a chore. It's not the funnest way to play Pathfinder. And we knew that stepping in, and we knew it was going to be a bit like this. I think back in those early days we were cheerfully optimistic, though, and we were like, oh, people love it. It's all like, and a lot of people do, but I think if you're a casual Pathfinder player and it's all of a sudden it's like, now I've got to learn new things. Now they're coming up with updates. Like, I've got to learn a new book. I've got to play a bunch of adventures that aren't full of kind of some of the stories and interesting NPC interactions and everything else that I usually get to have in my Pathfinder game. And now I'm on my third Death and Dying rules, and I'm wondering why I have to relearn this, for the third time. I can understand why a lot of people who are doing this on a Friday night because they've had a frustrating work week, and they just want to have fun making fun of each other's imaginary friends, goes, screw it. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. Can we play whatever we were playing, before we started the playtest? I'm sympathetic.
Do you expect a drop-off in activity now that Kingmaker's out?
That's a really good question. The funny thing about it is I put up the post about Kingmaker on my Facebook the other day, and I almost wrote, but don't touch it until after the podcast.
You joke,
but
I haven't played it.
September of next year.
Right. It might be. I mean, it's really good. I'm not touching it because it would chew up so much time. I think most of us, that's the hard part about working in the RPG industry. Is everybody goes, well, you could just play games all the time. It's like, oh no, no. and then some nights when you do, and you're like, oh, I can finally play a game, and you're like, oh, screw it, I'm going to sit and rewatch Deadwood for the 15th time, just to not do a thing, or but yeah, I'm hoping that it doesn't slow it down. There's a good chance that it might slow it down. Slow it down a little bit. Return of the Ruin Lords, I think, has an aspect of slowing it down. That's so far that's an adventure path that people have been waiting for, and they're very excited about it.
Yeah. Return of the Rune Lords and then Tyrant's Grasp with that 1-2 punch right before. I'm sitting there going, no, I can't play them all. And I'm in 4 groups, Stephen. I'm in 4 game groups, and I can't play them all.
No, I'm always amazed at how much stuff we put out each year, and there's like, you have to be extremely dedicated to be able to use and play it all. But some people do it. Other people, lament that they haven't played that. Or like, of course, I wrote a chapter of Hell's Vengeance, and then that adventure path got like, I don't want to play evil characters. I'm like, oh, come on, embrace your dark side. But yeah, we produce so much really good adventure content. You've got to work hard to chew through it. And yeah, we've got the ones that are coming out around this time are things that are really compelling and things that people wanted to see for a long time. So I'm like, thanks, James Jacobs. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, speaking of people that are dedicated, the fact that you've got multiple people giving you feedback on your section of the playtest. Yours is the second to last part.
Yep.
Like, I cannot imagine that there's that many groups that have gotten that deep into this adventure already.
No, there's not, but there's some folks that will just churn through it. And I do have to say that sometimes those groups don't give the best feedback, because role-playing games are hard. They take a good amount to master. I know in my lunch game, everybody, which I've been running this lunch game with the various version of the rules for probably about 2 years now. Everybody's, well, about a year and a half, maybe around there. Everybody's leveling up to level 8 because we're running it like a campaign. And with the 1.3 and everything else, I was ready to run the next section of the adventure, and half of the group couldn't show up because of whatever reason, and everybody else was all like, we didn't level up our characters. And I forgot how to level up the characters, and I'm like, oh, geez, it's super easy, right? And so I had to kind of walk them through it. Although I also had to walk them through some of the changes in the 1.2 and 1.3 updates as well. But even then, we basically play 2 times a week, an hour each session. It's just a lunch game, and we spent a half an hour with them asking a whole bunch of questions and me double checking math and stuff like that. So it really didn't take that long to level up those characters.
So,
but yeah.
In Pale Mountain's Shadow, it's been done for a little while, and it lists the playtest goals as talking about hazards and traps, and none of that is stuff that's been updated heavily in update 1.3. Is that something we can expect a little later, or does that show that the feedback you got is that you're pretty much on the right track?
It's a little bit of both, right? So one of the things that we really try to, so there are some things, resonance being one of them, which we're going to do something very interesting with the next phase of that one, which I don't think we've announced yet. So I'm going to be a little bit hushy about. There are some things that are load bearing and not load bearing, and then there's some things that are very easy to update and not very easy to update. So Resonance right now is very load bearing, and trying to update all of it would have an update that was probably about 15 pages long.
Wow.
And that by itself, because all of a sudden we'd have to talk about various things that were sitting in various places in the rules. And so one of the things we're going to see about that replacement is we're going to have a very sort of focused playtest on that one, rather than giving you like a 15-page update. The other thing is there are things that are like, well, we know that there are issues with it. but it's right enough where we don't feel like we need to change it. So the DCs that we changed, right, as I went through the various things, sometimes, a lot of times they went down. Sometimes they went up a little based on different things. And I was like, as I was doing it, I'm like, this one went up. What? And it's all like, yeah, it did. But that's okay, because we knew what the underlying math was. Mm-hmm. And most of the DC issues came from a couple of, which led us to change that thing, came from a couple of small outliers. But it was something that we still felt we needed to do. Mm-hmm. So the traps and hazards, well, we might have some quibbles, or there are some things that we'll take a look at in the final design, but it's not so bad that we feel like we need to fix it right now. Like Death and Dying. It's all like, okay, the first version of Death and Dying, people found really confusing, and we understood why, and yeah, it was a bit clunky. And the second one, oh, that worked really, really kind of well, but we wonder if we can do it a little bit better, right? And so those are kind of small pieces that we can iterate and do it very quickly, and see how people think we're going in that direction. But if it's like small little problems here and there, or a very small problem that we could fix relatively quickly, but with a long list of like changes in DCs or whatever, then we'll tend to go, that can wait for. We'll put a note on it. Everything else, assuming nothing structurally changes, we can make those fixes when we start compiling the final rulebook.
Speaking of compiling, some fans have been updating PDFs of the playtest rulebook using, like, implementing the new updates. Mm-hmm. How are we on the legality of this product?
That might be a weird question.
I am not the person to ask about that. I could have opinions on it, but and I have purposely not really looked at those things because I try to avoid meetings whenever possible. And I don't want to be in a meeting kind of talking about that. I think in a lot of ways, like, my very unofficial opinion on it is this is a playtest. It's a little bit, it would be very different than if people were hacking our PDFs in other sort of ways. But yeah, please don't ever ask me those kind of questions anymore, Ryan.
Yeah, that's fair. I was more looking for a company line, not for your opinion. I wasn't sure if this is something that Paizo had, sent out an all points bulletin on.
Not that I know of. Okay. Yeah.
Are you willing
Karen,
to...
why don't you ask a question so I don't get in more trouble?
Okay. Do you wish to brave our audience questions?
Sure.
Let's see here. Gustavo Malik has a question about the new Death and Dying rules.
Okay.
If you have Dying 2 and Wounded 1 and you fail your saving throw, then you will get Dying 4? Is that how it's supposed to go?
So you're Dying 1. Well... Let's go back a little bit. So I imagine the question is this: you were wounded 2. So was it wounded 2?
It's Dying 2 with Wounded 1.
Oh, so you were wounded 1 and then got hit. Let's say you got crit for Dying 2. Mm-hmm. So then you'd be Dying 3. And then if you failed that save, you'd be dead.
Oh,
very dead. He seems to think that by raw you should be Dying 4. Where do you think the misunderstanding is?
Well, Dying 4 is raw. Oh. Dying 4 is dead. Mm-hmm. So if you get to Dying 4, you're dead. So basically what happened was he'd been hit down before to Dying 1. Mm-hmm. He comes back up. He becomes Wounded 1. He gets smacked again with a critical hit, let's say. He's Dying 2, but that goes down because he was Wounded 1. That actually goes down to Dying 3. Then his next saving throw, he fails. Dying 4, dead. Mm-hmm. And so, basically, the short answer is yes, he is correct.
Very dead. Ouch.
Scott Melville has a suggestion for scaling negative negative hit points if you want to go that route, where he just suggests instead of negative con, you do negative half your total HP. That way it still reflects how tough you are as a character, and it scales up better. Is there any chance you ever go back to negative hit points, or are you really set on a dying system close to what you've got?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think we're set on, like I said, other than certain very specific goals, I don't think we're set on anything. So I think actually that's how 4th edition did it, if I'm remembering right. And, it's been a long time since I worked on that game.
Yeah.
The funny thing about it is I know that's not how 5th edition does it, because I play 5th edition every so often. Just a weird aside. So my girlfriend works for PAX, or Penny Arcade, and PAX just happened recently, and she goes to Acquisitions Incorporated, the big thing, and Chris Perkins, who I used to work with, fantastic fellow, is running the game. And I went home because I had enough of PAX for the weekend. I didn't need to go to Acquisitions Incorporated. But she was very excited to go see it. And so she's texting me, and she's like, Patrick Rothfuss is at like negative 34 hit points, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, and my response, because I'm a total nerd about this junk, is that's not 5th edition. That's not the way 5th edition's doing it. What's Chris Perkins doing? So, which makes me kind of wonder if Chris Perkins is all like, yeah, I don't like the 5th edition Death and Dying rules either. I'm going to use the 4th edition rules. Or it was just more fun that way, or something like that. Yeah, that's definitely a way that we could do it. To be honest, mostly with me, because like I tend to try to stay away from negative numbers. Like my Delve game, there's no negative numbers at all. I just don't. I just don't. I don't mind dealing with them as a person, but trying to explain them sometimes to new players who have to dig up that knowledge from when they were in elementary school and middle school and haven't used ever since, right? And the fact that you have to tell them zero is a number and all sorts of stuff. You know, all of a sudden you're rehashing old medieval arguments. I tend to avoid them, but that being said, that is a very viable solution.
Gustav,
you did bring up 5e, and there was some more talk in the chat about how 2e playtest, or the playtest version of 2e, compares to 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons. I believe you when the design team says that this was not used as a template or anything like that. But so, like, how do you think you can finally get that point across that 2e and 5th edition are not, like, there's design parallels, not one copying the other?
Well, I mean, I would say read both of the games. Yeah. You know, like, yeah, I don't mean to be flippant about that kind of thing. There are, so here's where I think the parallels really work, is both us and the 5th edition design team, and my best friend in the entire world, Robert Schwal, was on that design team. We're looking at solving similar problems, right? We just were. In a lot of ways, 5th edition did that by really flattening the math, and we decided that was not the way to go. And so we flattened the math in some ways and not others. And we did that because, and I like to joke that there is an aspect of P1 design that says, hey, do you like candy? We have lots of candy. And unfortunately, that creates a bloated system later on down the pipe. And so we had to find a way that says, hey, kids, you want candy, right? And we're going to give you enough where you're really going to enjoy it, but we're not going to, you know, overload it so you get a sugar high and you start running around the room and beating on people. Both games had similar problems that they were trying to solve, and both games went in very different kind of directions with that. I saw Jeremy Crawford. I congratulated him on such a great game, and then like, but I'm wondering kind of why you did this. To Steve, I remember, right? And so there are things that I think 5e is a very playable game up to a certain point, and then it starts to get I don't know if dry is the right word, and dry is not the right word. It's kind of hard to say, but we wanted to have the ability to do more with the system than I think the folks over at Wizard of the Coast want to do. It's one of the reasons why you don't see a whole bunch of sort of new character options and stuff from them, and they seemed a lot more happy putting out really good adventure content. We want to do both, and so we went about solving those issues in two different ways.
And
at least that would be the long answer, the short answer question, or the long answer to the short question.
You're kind of hitting around the question I really am interested in your perspective on, is what, in the great space of the fact that PF2 doesn't exist in a vacuum of RPGs, what do you think is Pathfinder's rules niche that it feels that other games don't? Like, where is your carved out corner? And we've lost Steven.
Or you've stumped him.
I don't think I can stump Steven.
I was going to suggest we wrap it up because we are getting some technical stuff. Oh, there we go. Okay, Steven.
No.
Some lag, and I missed.
Well, Skype has evidently decided that we cannot continue this call with Steven.
I would like to try and muscle through this one last question because it was a good question, Param. So can we just do another sound check? Steven, when I say make some, you say noise. Make some.
Noise.
Make some.
Noise.
Aha.
Okay.
Okay.
Seems pretty smooth.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll ask it quickly. You were hinting around.
Yeah. There.
Oh.
We heard garbled nonsense, which may be what you were saying, but it probably not.
I mean, you have a really good Wookiee voice.
All right, one more try, and then if not, we'll just have to accept that technology is spent. All right, so one more sound test. Steven, when I say make some, you say noise. Make some.
Noise.
Make some.
Noise.
And now how about you just give us a one sentence so that we can get through a whole sentence without you getting garbled?
I would really like some tacos right now.
Gotcha. Tacos.
All right. Skype wants you to have those tacos. That's why it's trying to sabotage the rest of the call. All right, Param, go for it with the question.
The question is, what do you think the rules niche that Pathfinder has that other games don't? Like, where is your corner?
I would say in a lot of ways it's depth of play experience. And, you know, a good amount of high adventure, too, although other games definitely have high adventure. Sometimes I think we have even greater high adventure. It's a mix of high adventure, the depth of our campaign setting, which, quite frankly, you may or may not use, but I hope you use bits and pieces of it because there's a lot of compelling stuff in that, and depth of play options, not only for the players, but also for the GM.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Stephen. It would have been great to continue to talk to you, but we have taken up a lot of your time, more time than Skype was willing to give us. So is there anything you'd like to shout out to if we can get through the shout outs?
No, other than thank you guys very much for having me on. It was a lot of fun. Always good chat with you two.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I know that we really pitched this as let's talk cartography, and then 1.3 came out, and it's like we really can't just talk cartography, can we? So I'm glad you were able to kind of adjust on the fly with us, and you gave us really thoughtful answers and some really interesting things to think about.
Cool. Well, yeah, I enjoyed both sides of the conversation. Thanks.
Excellent. All right, Param, anything you want to shout out before we wrap up?
Go check out those maps. They're really awesome. I really like what they've done with the map work.
Also, go check out Kingmaker, but don't play it.
Not yet.
Until, at least February? Make it like your Valentine's date with yourself?
Right, exactly. That sounds good to me.
There are extensive relationship rules, so it's appropriate.
Right, that is very true. But don't tell us about it on the message boards. We'll be
And I guess one last question. When does your new album release, your boy band album?
Never. Never.
November. He said November.
November. Oh, okay. Sorry. There must have been another lag issue.
Never.
Until next time, I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Parham.
And if you want to find the path, you need no direction.
Bye, everyone.